Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Hello everybody, my name's Al Marineau and I'm an alcoholic. I've been sober now 42 years come April. Of course, any fool can plainly see that I got into AA when I was very young. I was 10 years old when I came in. I was 38 when I came into AA, so I'm 80 years old. And you know, it's awful good to be here today. In fact, damn it, it's good to be anywhere at my age. You know, you get so you don't think about how old you are. You just keep moving. You know, just keep moving. And now you look at the girls. You just look at the girls, you see. So what the hell am I following that girl for? You heard that story.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think.
But you have the most beautiful girls here that I ever saw in my life. All of them are gorgeous, you know, just gorgeous. And I pay attention to that now. You know, I was doing my big drinking back in the 30s. I was a studio musician for 25 years, and at that time I was too, when they could catch me. It's terrible how intolerant those motion picture studios are, you know. You go to work drunk and you fall on your face, and they don't like it. They're just very intolerant. Then they don't hire you again, you see. That's the thing that sends you home. God, it's embarrassing to be sent home in the middle of a session, which I did. I went through the whole gamut. But in the 30s, all the drunks like me, all the alcoholics, we went in a sort of a cycle. We were all trying to get sober. All those that I knew, outside of the ones that committed suicide, were sent up to a nut house, and there were gobs of them, you know. The AMA and the Medical Association did not recognize alcoholism as a disease at that time. So you couldn't get into a hospital, or the VA over here. I tried several times to get guys in the VA. No, they didn't consider alcoholism as a disease. So you had no way to turn. So we take, the AMA did not recognize alcoholism as a disease until about 1946 or 48. We had a member of Alcoholics Anonymous who was a senator from Iowa. I won't give you his name because he's an AA. And he got a bill through Congress whereby they were going to dish out $350 million a year for the rehabilitation of alcoholics. And the next day, AMA recognized alcoholism as a disease. And that's the truth. So most of us alcoholics would take the cure, you know, the aversion treatment where they puke you to death. And when they feed you all that booze and then they hit you with that stuff and then you get sick, you're supposed to believe that it was the booze that made you sick. Well, old billiard drinkers like us, we know that's a fallacy, you know. And then the next thing we'd end up maybe at a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And I went through that. I took 3 seances with a guy. And then they'd end up embracing some religion because they were terrible sinners. They were terrible people. And some of them embraced the religion so much they got as nuts on the religion as they did the booze. So they ended up out on the street corner. You know, they'd have been better off to stay drunk. It's not a sin to drink, you know. It's a sin to be a glutton. That's all. That's as far as anybody can take you. So I went through all of these things, and Alcoholics Anonymous came along. I wanted to stay sober very badly, very badly. I lost everything in life that was worth a damn. I had willpower. I worked my way through high school. I worked my way through college. I come from a family of 10, so they couldn't give any of us too much. And everything I wanted to do, I just got my nose in there and I worked like hell. All alcoholics are like that, you know, until the booze takes over. So I heard about Alcoholics Anonymous, and Alcoholics Anonymous gave me a 100% guarantee that I would never drink again if I lived according to certain conditions as honest as I possibly could. In fact, Alcoholics Anonymous gives us all a 100% guarantee that we will never drink again as long as we live, if we live according to certain conditions as honest as we possibly can. And some of us say, I haven't the ability to be honest anymore. But it says in the book, the willingness to try to be honest alone will do the job. And we who honestly want to stay sober, and I keep saying honestly because this is a prerequisite to sobriety. We tried to work these steps to the best of our ability, but unfortunately, said in AA, easy does it. So a lot of us kind of stepped on that easy does it, you know, business. But we who honestly wanted to stay sober tried to live according to these steps to the best of our ability. And they told us so many times it was our stinking thinking that caused our drinking. That we will have a change in our thinking if we live according to these 12 simple steps as honest as we possibly can. And lo and behold, the miracle happens. We do stay sober. And our family and our close friends notice long before we realize that there's been a definite change in our attitude towards ourselves and our attitude towards others. And we start getting a little bit honest. And the miracle happens. And we know there's only one thing that can cause a miracle, and that's some power greater than ourselves. And it's the beautiful thing about Alcoholics Anonymous. We can choose any power that we desire outside of a human power. Mine is the Great Spirit. I got a lot of Indian blood, so it's the Great Spirit. It works very good for me. You can believe in anything you desire outside of a human power. And Bill wrote these beautiful ABCs after the steps, which I didn't realize for a long, long time why they were there. He says, A, I'm an alcoholic and cannot manage my own life. And B, that probably no human power could help me. No probably with me, I tried them all. No human power could help me. And C, that God could and would if sought. How do I seek God? How do I seek God? Go back to a religion? Oh no, that didn't work. I seek God by living these 12 simple steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I like to call them the spiritual steps because all are good and all are positive. If we live these steps to the best of our ability, although just a little bit, something happens where we can stay sober. We can stay sober. So this is Alcoholics Anonymous all wrapped up into a little package. Our 12 spiritual steps and these 3 ABCs at the end of the steps. And this is the way you and I stay sober if you want to know. Because we do have a change in our attitudes. We have a change in our personality, and definitely a change in the change in our personality is the great spiritual awakening that we hear so much about. Now it's true some have a spiritual awakening overnight, the hot flash, you know. 1 out of every 10,000. Like Bill Wilson, the founder, one of the co-founder of AA, he had a hot flash. And the guys used to kid him about it in the old days, but that was what it was with him. Once in a great while, someone will have a sudden spiritual awakening, and I wouldn't have believed it till a very dear friend of mine that came into AA a couple weeks ahead of me had what we called a sudden spiritual awakening, where they had a definite change in their attitude and their thinking and their personality overnight. But with you and me, it's a gradual thing. And it's better that way, I do believe. And it works very, very beautiful. And to me, this is Alcoholics Anonymous. Of course, the social part of AA is so very important. All my friends are members of Alcoholics Anonymous. I tolerate some non-members of AA, but I have to. I'm in a phony business selling now, you know, and you know, you stretch your tolerance a hell of a long way sometimes, but you get away from them, you get back with your AA friends. So many beautiful things. We used to have things to do like making 12-step calls, which are actually getting to be rather a void thing. We didn't have these hospitals or any place. We had to take care of this drunk. So my second wife, who is now my present wife now for 40 years, God bless her, she and I would start out to make a 12-step call, and I always took her where there was a couple of concern. And I'd say, we got a 12-step call tonight, fine. So after dinner, I'd stop at a liquor store, pick up a jug, we go to the place, and usually it's a man and wife, and the wife's standing there crying and wringing her hands and going nuts. My wife would sit her down and talk to her and tell her about AA and what it did for me and all of that. And I'd go in and sit down with a jug, and I'd start tapering the old boy off. Usually puking and dying, you know. You see yourself right there. And I'd taper the guy off till maybe 2 o'clock in the morning. We'd go home. I'd get back there at 9 o'clock in the morning and start on him again. And within 3 days, you've got this guy back on the job. This is what we called 12-step work in those days. Now all you have to do is bounce him into a hospital, you see. You can forget all about the bastard if you want to, you know. But that's the way it used to be. That's the way it used to be, many, many years ago. People come up to me and say, my name is Joe, my name is Pete, my name is Al. You know, that's against our tradition. At the level of press, radio, and film, we don't break our anonymity, and we never break another person's anonymity. But on our level, we break our anonymity. I got into Alcoholics Anonymous. I had a big date at MGM, maybe 6 months later. And they used to do 300 pictures a year over there, now they're doing 30. So that's why I got out of that damn business. So all these guys in the brass section are friends of mine, and about they had to get this picture out, and about midnight, why, all the brass is drunk as usual, you know. And I'm sober, and one of the guys came up to me and says, why don't you drink with us? I mean, you know what I says, well, I belong to Alcoholics Anonymous, and we don't drink. He says, well, one drink, you know, and I says, look, we don't drink at all. I'm not on the wagon or anything, I just don't drink. Well, the word got around that I belong to Alcoholics Anonymous. So the first trombone player came up to me, Randy, and he says, he was about half snorted, and he says, don't pay any attention to those bastards. They're just jealous, and so am I. And I'm going to give you a buzz. If I hadn't have broke my anonymity there, see, I would have lost somebody. Maybe he'd be dead by now. So about maybe a month, 2 months later, Randy called me, took him to a meeting. He's been sober now about 41 years. 41 years. Randy got some of the other guys in the band. Every place I worked after that, whenever anybody said anything, I'd say I belong to Alcoholics Anonymous. Now there's maybe 150 musicians that are in AA that I maybe wasn't directly responsible for, but my babies were responsible for. Randy's son came to me one day and he says, you're my grandpa. And I says, I don't even know you. He says, I'm Randy. He says, I'm Randy's son. Well, I said, I'll be goddamn. How do you like that? So he had babies, and that just goes on and on and on. So there was an article in the grapevine some time ago about this, about Dr. Bob, one of our co-founders, wrote a very beautiful article about it. We can't break anybody else's anonymity, but how the hell does that guy next door find out how you stayed sober? Everybody in my neighborhood does. There's a guy across the street needs AA real bad. I'll get him one of these days, if he doesn't die first, you know. These guys that retire, you know, they get on that booze, something awful. I had to pick him up and get him out of the gutter and take him home one day, and I says, maybe you'd better quit drinking, old boy. I got the answer for you, Alcoholics Anonymous. He says, I'll let you know. So I said, let me know before you die, will you? When I came into AA, there were 34 members. And we just had one broad. One. Sybil was the only one we had. And all the rest of them were, if my wife was here and I said broad, she wouldn't have anything to do, she wouldn't speak to me for a week. But all the guys in AA at that time were older, 40 years or up. There was Cliff Walker, he's dead now, I can use his name, Cliff, and myself and Sybil, and Bud Garberg, he's dead now too, he was a baby of mine. They and myself, we're 4 or 5 of us less than 40 years old. They used to say you have to drink for 15 years, at least a fifth a day to qualify for AA. You know, it isn't how much we drink, it's how the stuff affects you. That's the important thing, you know. We've got all these young kids in AA now. My God, I'd have been in when I was 16 if it had been around. I'm sure I would have. But anyway, they were, Mortimer J. was the leader of the group. Now, AA had started before this group started, but it fell flat on its ass. They just didn't stay sober. So Mort came along and he picked up the pieces and he started a group at the Cecil Hotel. And they meandered around, and finally when I came in, it was over on 6th Street. And Mort says, how should we start the meeting? He says, I suggest that we read a portion of Chapter 5 and how it works. And Mortimer J. was the guy that said this. So everybody agreed. And then there was some guy in the audience, most likely, the group that most likely was a religious fanatic. And he says, we should recite the Lord's Prayer at the end of the meeting. And my God, it hit the fan. And these guys started screaming at one another, and one guy hit the other guy in the head with a chair. They said, we're going to have another religion, another cult down here, you know. As I'm coming back, this is exciting. I like this. So they took a vote, and they voted to recite the Lord's Prayer at the meeting. So this is done all over the world now, all over the world, very few exceptions, all over the world. And it's very good. It was kind of squirrely. They had a guy at the door. Now don't forget, when I came in, there were 400 members in the whole United States. I read that in the records back in New York, 400 members. So it hadn't proved a thing. We had a guy at the door who, when you came to the door, he'd say, do you want to stay sober on an all-time basis? And if you hesitate a little bit, he'd say, get the hell out of here. Make up your mind. So we screened them right at the door. And our percentage of sobriety was very high, of course. Then a couple of our members were real good guys, but they kept getting drunk on us, and they'd go into a bar room and they'd tell everybody there that they were members of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they were screwing us up real good. So we had a meeting of the steering committee of this group, practically the whole group. And we passed a law. Now, as you know, if you don't know, I'll tell you, there's no laws in AA. Everything is suggested. In fact, at that time, we even incorporated AA in the state of California. So no bastard could start a group without us, you know, without our permission. We never enforced it, but we could have, you know. Crazy. So we passed a law that anybody that got drunk twice couldn't come to AA anymore. They were barred for life. Well, at that time we had the book. That's all we had. We didn't have anybody from New York to guide us, thank God. So everything we did, we took right out of the book. We referred to the book forever. We didn't have these pamphlets or anything, which most cases are unnecessary anyway. All old guys like me, they don't believe in all that crap. The big book is the thing. The big book is the thing. And all our answers are there if we want them. So Pete Cunningham, I can give you these names, there's just 4 of us still alive, who was quite an intelligent guy and a hell of a guy, quite a studious person. He came to the next meeting and he says, we made a big mistake at our meeting. He says, what was that? He says, I've looked in the book and I've looked in the book and I can't find anywhere where we have a right to bar anybody from Alcoholics Anonymous. He says, anybody with an alcoholic problem is welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'll be goddamn, we had to let them back in. But they eliminated themselves eventually. And then we moved over to 2200 West 7th. About July of that year. I came in April, and then we moved over there because the group was growing so very, very fast. And the group grew up to about 600. 2200 West 7th is a beautiful big building with a great big room downstairs and a big kitchen, and they have many rooms upstairs. A guy by the name of Farber, a European Jew, owned this place, and they kind of kept it as a Jewish center. And they used to have the gazatskas and everything else in this place. And he wasn't going to let us in at first, and then 3 or 4 days later he asked us to come back, and we went back, and he says, when you said Alcoholics Anonymous, I thought you were a bunch of drunks that were drinking, and he said, you can have the hall. And you know, this guy, the old guys don't remember that, but I remember it so well. And many times we didn't pay the bill. We didn't pay our rent. The rent was pretty good. And we didn't pay our rent, and old Farber went right along with us, God bless him. And he is very, very responsible for the success of AA in Southern California. His name was Farber. I've lost all track of him. So the group grew to about 600, and by this time, then the women started coming in. And my God, they were coming out from under the rocks, and falling out of trees. You never saw anything like it. It was just beautiful. It was just beautiful. The meeting was started at 8:30, and that was for everybody, you know, open. And then at 9:30 we closed it, and then we had a alcoholic-only meeting, and all the women went upstairs, and they called it a group. They called the group the Non-Alcoholic Family Group, which was a forerunner for Al-Anon. And this is where it started. My wife was very much involved in this thing, and all the men and the women who were partners of the alcoholic started this thing. And then Wilson came out here, Bill Wilson, and he heard about this thing. He attended the meeting, and he went back to New York, and he sent his wife out, Lois, to check it out. And they had a big banquet for Lois, the women, all the non-alcoholics. And we have a picture of it, by God, and I tell you, it's wonderful to look at it. Just 3 or 4 of them still alive. But Lois started what we call Al-Anon today. So it started here at 2200 West 7th. You are the luckiest people in the world. You belong to Alcoholics Anonymous in Southern California, which is the greatest in the world, because we have the largest population, and we have started more goddamn things here than anybody, you know. We had the first central office in the world, by the way. The first central office here in 42. Pete Cunningham and DeForest Gould and myself got our group down there to finance the central office. And we started one over on 7th Street at that time, and we moved around a little bit. Anyway, all those things were started right here, out of the book. The war came along, and things got very, very bad for gasoline. And in 42, those people from Santa Barbara and Bakersfield and all over down to the Orange County couldn't get up here because they were short of gas. So we encouraged everybody to start their own meeting. And now we have more meetings in Southern California than any other place in the world. You know, all you have to do is fall out of your back door, and you can walk 6 blocks and you're at a meeting. And especially in Los Angeles, you know, which is good. I think it's wonderful. So that kind of broke up the old gang down there, and I stuck around till about 46, and I started a group over in my neighborhood at Washington and Arlington called the Arlington Group. We celebrated our 37th anniversary last week, and it's a good group. It's always packed right to the doors, and it's a good group. 1 hour, no coffee break, none of that crap. No cakes. Yeah. Why should you get a cake just because you're sober? You know? But people... So we don't go through all that formula, and all you get there for 60 minutes is straight AA, right from the start to the finish. It's kind of cold ass, but I'll say it's good. You get the basics, and that's the main thing. So 37 years for a group is pretty good, and we figured out there's been 8 newcomers a week coming there. It's Tuesdays and Thursdays, but the Tuesday is a big meeting. 8 a week has come along, and damn close to 18,000 people have come to their first meeting at that group since its inception. Now, if half of those people stay sober, you got a hell of a lot of people that you've saved. And after all, a group is for nothing more than 12-step work. Don't forget that. They're just a group doing 12-step work instead of an individual, and that's what a group is set up for. Then we've got all these wonderful friends that we can see once a week or twice a week, whatever we wish to. I came out to Los Angeles. I was a trombone player, and I studied with the greatest there in Chicago, and I got a rating as one of the 4 best in the United States. Back in 1932, Marineau magazine was very bad for me. That ego was awful bad to have that thing come out. You know? So I had to get drunk for a couple of days over that. And I was married to a very intolerant woman. She would get all upset if I didn't come home for 3 or 4 days. Especially out here when we'd really get on these dandies, you know. And then it got to the point where I'd come home and there'd be divorce papers all over the place. My God, you know, with a hangover you could cut with a knife and you're sick and you're dying and you're puking and then here's divorce papers. Jesus, what are you going to do? Cut your throat. It was awful. Across the street from where we lived there on Normandy Place, right near Beverly Boulevard, was a guy by the name of Jack, another musician, a fine musician. Perfect pitch, right range, had the world by the tail, the worst drunk I ever met in my life. He was what you call a bed drinker. Have you ever run into a guy that'll stay in bed? He would stay in bed for a month if somebody would get the booze to him, and his wife was his ace in the hole, and she used to get a jug to him every day. Jack and I formed a little AA group all our own. It was one alcoholic helping the other. If I had a date at the studio in the morning and I was dying and I'd call over to him and I'd say, Jack, make the run or get some medicine, he'd get over there within a half hour. I did the same thing for Jack. One alcoholic helping the other. Just exactly like AA, you know, where two or more are gathered together. Down around the corner, old Sam Cohen had a beautiful a liquor sale. And it wasn't a bar, it was a liquor store, a beautiful liquor store. And I wanted to set myself up a nice charge account, which we called a cuff in those days, and I got him cuffed up to 2 jugs, and he wouldn't cuff for any more. I said, Jack, old Sam's tough. I cuffed him for 2 jugs, he won't cuff for any more. He says, most likely you're not working him right. I said, why? He says, I owe him $500. How the hell did you get him up to $500? He says, by using my head, dummy. Owed him 20, paid him 10. Owed him 50, paid him 25. Owed him 100, paid 50. He says, you know something? It took me quite a while, but I got him up to 500. I says, Jack, you're a genius. You're an absolute genius. So one day we're both dying for a drink, and he says, let's see Sam. So we went down to see Sam. And Sam says, I can't give you a jug, Jack. You owe me 500 now. I'm going bankrupt. My back's to the wall. The taxes are killing me. Quack, quack, quack. He says, borrowed from some friends. I need that 500. Hawk your instruments. It went on and on and on. And finally, get under the bed. I lived at a boarding house a couple of years. We'd hear that. We'd say, get under the bed. Or get under the mattress. Get under the bed. So we were going along, and the old Jack saying, no, I haven't got it. And all we want is a jug, and quack, quack, quack. And finally, Jack says, old Sam says, why don't you go down to the bank and borrow it? And Jack says, on a personal note, and Sam says, yeah. Well, he says, I need a co-signer on that note, Sam. And Sam says, I'll co-sign. Well, things got pretty terrible in my family and my friends. I had a lot of friends out here. Kids that used to play in my band at the University of Idaho. There were 4 of them down here. Very, very good. I went through the little school on the hill called University of Idaho. Town called Moscow. God, what a name. Good school. Good school. There were some of those guys that used to play in my band up there that were down here and doing studio work and doing very, very well. We were one of those cycles where there were quite a few good musicians came to school at the same time. So they were on my neck on account of this booze and my family. And so I took that cure, and I was drunk in 2 weeks. And then the next thing, I went to a psychiatrist that was recommended to me, and he must have been good because he spoke broken English, and he couldn't, you couldn't pronounce his name, so he must have been a good psychiatrist. And we had 3 seances together, and he said, you're of a superior intelligence, I don't know what you're here for, and he threw me out, which I thought was very good. Maybe I was a little smart-ass with him, you know. I was sober when I went to. Old John lived in this town. He was a bad drinker, and his family, who were very good people, he came from a very fine family. Did you ever figure out all alcoholics come from fine families? See some drunk walking down the street, hitting both sides of the sidewalk, and the old biddies will say, and look at him, and he comes from such a fine family. And that wonderful wife and those beautiful kids, and look at that guy. So his family sent him to the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist gave him treatment after treatment, and nothing happened. And so finally, he went this time, and he's drunk all the time, and the psychiatrist says, John, we're going to have to change the method. I want you to answer my questions honestly. He says, what would happen to you if I cut off your left ear? And John says, I wouldn't be able to, my hearing would be impaired about 50%. Pardon me for getting mixed up. My hearing would be impaired about 50%. I says, what would happen to you if I cut off your right ear? And John says, I wouldn't be able to see. He says, well, why wouldn't you be able to see? He says, because my hat would fall down over my eyes. I told that story 5,000 times, and I damn near forgot it, you see. That's what 80 years old does to you. Well, we moved up to Tujunga because our oldest girl had asthma, and it was very lonesome up there, and I thought maybe I could stay sober, but it's the same old deal. I met a priest up there by the name of Dennis Falvey from Ireland, a wonderful man. I mean, one of the nicest people I ever met in my life. He sold me on a deal of getting the choir going in his church. Now, I hadn't been to church for 22 years, but he sold me on the deal, and I got busy and got a choir going, and we were doing very well. I'd get drunk, and I wouldn't show up at Mass on Sunday mornings, end up in his back door bumming him for $5 to get sober on, and he'd say, now don't spend it all in one place, always pay him back. I want to know where I could get that the next time. And a catastrophe happened, a real catastrophe. He says he was a different personality. And he says, I couldn't figure it out, and nobody else could figure it out. And he never took another drink. And he said, it was just like overnight, something had changed. It's like some people, they fall in a well, and when they pull them out, their hair is gray. One of those things, he says, just like that. And I says, what caused this change in his personality? He says, I don't know. I don't know the cause, but I know the result. So I says, that's fine, and I started walking away, and he says, just a minute. I want to tell you something before you go. He says, Al, it's not a moral vice or a sin to drink, but it is a sin to be a glutton. And that's as much as I can help you, and that's as much as any honest man of the cloth can help you. And I went my way. And like all drunks at that time, of course, the old lady divorced me, did me a great favor. I didn't think so at the time. It was the greatest favor she ever did me. And I bumped back to Hollywood, had a room. Within 2 or 3 years, why, I had drunk myself right down to the bottom, of course, just like all drunks do. And I lost out on all the studios and all my friends. Everybody had given me the business. And I ended up in a $2 a week room above a grocery store at Venice and Arlington, in the northwest corner. Caddy corner across the street, there was a bar and a liquor store, which is gone now. And I had a good cuff in that place, and I had it made. But I lost all my friends. I'd be walking down the street, and my friends would see me, they walk across the street to avoid me. God, that hurt. God, that hurt. I was going up alleys to avoid people. I get a date at some stinking little studio in the collection agency, grab my check before I could get to it. We were getting $15 a week unemployed when you could hold your finger close, steady enough to sign the damn thing over at the unemployment. God, many a time I'd walk around the block 6 times before I could sign it. It was real, real bad. Now I have no friends, but I met a gal at that time. Her name was Cecilia. And Cecilia's husband had just died, and she was having it real rough. And I'm telling you right now that this was just from heaven for me to have somebody that I could sit down and talk to and be with. And Cecilia stuck with me through my drinking, and I was doing an awful lot of drinking in those days, and getting in a lot of trouble. And she stuck with it. We've been married now 40 years, Cecilia and I. A wonderful gal. So I got into a real bad jam. I got into a hell of a bad jam. And it looks like I'm going to get it real good. Now, drunk driving I was in Lincoln Heights so often that it wasn't even funny. I mean, God, I hated that place. I'd come out of a blackout. I was the blackout artist for a week at a time. I couldn't tell you much what happened, maybe just 2 or 3 little top points. I remember I was working at the studio out here, and one of the guys says, you remember what we were talking about over at the Sunset and Vine last Wednesday? And I says, I wasn't in Hollywood last Wednesday. He says, to hell you weren't, don't call me a liar. He says, were you drunk? And I said, Dad, I was so drunk I don't even remember being there. And he says, you didn't act drunk. Well, I says, I don't even remember being there. I was just blacked out. And I could remember little things that happened, little spots. But for weeks, I'd be just weeks, maybe 2 or 3 weeks at a time. I couldn't tell you where I was or what I had done. I never ate when I was drinking. I didn't want to sop up all that good booze and lose the effect, Waste of money. You just had to stay away from the food, and you could stay drunk on less booze. That's the way it was with me at that time. So anyway, I got into a real bad jam, and I got a hold of a lawyer, and he says, I'll keep you out of jail for $250. And I said, well, now, just a minute. I said, I won't go to jail. Yeah, you're on probation. I says, hell, I'm on probation now. He said, I'll keep you out. So I got him, I rustled up $250 by hook and crook, and then he came back to me and he says, did you ever see your record down there? And I said, no. He says, it's awful. It's awful. You've been driving without a license for years. And I says, I know. So he says, I need another $250 to keep you out of San Quentin. And he says, that's about where you're going with that record of yours. And I says, my God, I never killed anybody. I've never been. He says, it makes a difference. The guy was as phony as the $3 bill, but I mean, I was scared to death. So I called up one of my oldest brother up in Idaho. He was quite wealthy, and I said, he was my ace in the hole. All drunks have an ace in the hole. I did. When things were really, really, really bad, and I was in the corner, I could call Bill. And old Bill would always come through. He never failed me. When I was going to school and I was short my rent money and stuff, I could always call Bill, and he'd come through with 10 or 20. In those days, that was a hell of a lot of money. I called him, and I told him the story, and I says, I might end up in San Quentin. And he says, if you end up in San Quentin and it keeps you sober, that's the place for you. And he hung up. Holy God, I'll tell you, that was a terrible shock. So I got 90 days, and I did 45, I think it was, or 50. When I went home, I says, I will never drink again. If I do, I'm going to kill myself. And you know, how many times have we all said that? And then the day came, something came up. And I jumped on a horse and I rode in all directions. I jumped in that squirrel cage and I went around and around and around and around. We have the greatest ability of any class of people in the world to make mountains out of molehills. We're absolutely perfect at that. And that's what always caused us to take that first damn drink. The medicine is the only medicine that we knew. So I got on my last drunk, which was the worst drunk I was ever on in my life. It was 8 weeks long. Didn't eat anything. Lost 30 pounds. I was a walking zombie. Every morning at 6 o'clock, I was across the street at that bar, and the bartender, I had a $150 cuff over there. Hell. The bartender was a drunk too, and I'd help him clean up the joint, clean out the spittoons, and I'd sit up on the stool, and he'd throw them down, and I'd throw them back until they hooked on. And I'd stay there till about noon, go next door and get myself a jug and go up and pass out. And this went on for 8 weeks. I was about to die. And then I got a call from old Jack across town, March 1st of 1941. March 1st of 1941, when that article came out in the Saturday Evening Post. He says, hey. I says, yeah. He says, have you seen the Saturday Evening Post this week? And I said, no, why? Well, he says, there's a group of people in New York who hooked the same idea that you and I used to have. I said, what's that? He says, they call themselves Alcoholics Anonymous. One alcoholic helping the other. I says, no kidding. And he says, yeah, it shows a guy lying in bed, and most likely that fella's brought him some booze. And then he says, when that guy in bed is well and this other fella's down, he goes and helps him. But he says, the amazing thing, there's 100 of them doing this. And I says, isn't that wonderful? That's like a union. And he says, that's right. A union of drunks. I says, we're starting to get smart, aren't we? He says, yep, that's right. Beautiful idea. And so I said, read me some more. And he says, well, I can't read the small print, you see. He says, I'm pretty drunk and my eyes won't focus right now. So I go along, and maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks later, why, Jack gives me another buzz, and he says, I found this thing called Alcoholics Anonymous. I says, yeah, what about it? He says, they don't drink. I says, they don't drink? He says, they don't drink. I says, my God. What's it all about? He says, I've been sober a week. I says, you've been sober a week? He says, yeah, they got a chapter out here. I says, Jack, the worst drunk in the world, the worst psychopathic drunk in the world, if you can stay sober a week, I'm a cinch for a lifetime. How did you find it? Tell me. He says, well, I was down cuffing for a jug, and one of the local drunks was paying part of his bill. I got him by the arm and got him outside, and I says, what are you paying your bill for, dum-dum? You're going to ruin it for the rest of us in this neighborhood. And he says, well, I just joined a thing called Alcoholics Anonymous, and we make amends, and I'm making amends. I says, my God, what about it? So he says, I went to a meeting, and I've been sober a week. I says, send him over. He says, oh, I can't send him over. He says, you have to call him. And here's his phone number, his name. His name was Fowler. Imagine that, I can remember that name, guy by the name of Fowler. He's been dead 1,000 years, he slipped off. But I called Fowler, and he says, I'll be over tomorrow afternoon. I says, don't come in the afternoon. He says, why? I says, come in the morning. I says, I'll be passed out by noon. Well, he says, you're still giving orders. And I says, listen, I'm telling you the truth. I have the DTs if I don't pass out by noon. Well, he came over there a couple times, and I was passed out like I promised him. Very honest man. So I told the old landlady, God bless her, she was 9 years old. He said, you tell that guy when he sobers up to give me a buzz. Well, she got me sober, the old lady. Her whole family were drunks. Her name was Woodbury, I'll never forget. So I got sober, got a hold of the guy, and I'm dying, shaking, puking. Everything is terrible. And he talked to me on a Wednesday night. And I thought that he was representing some cult, the way he talked about this God business, you know. Jesus. It was awful. So he says, I'll pick you up Friday night and take you to a meeting. I says, just a minute. I haven't decided to lend my name to this wacky doodle outfit that you're... I'm going to check it out myself before I find out. Now, of course... So he got a little angry, and he wrote out the address. He says, I'll see you there Friday night. So Friday came. I scared to get out of my door. I mean, I was scared to leave my room. You know, that terrible, terrible fear after being drunk like that. I was afraid to walk up the street and go up alleys. It was awful, just awful. So I called Cecilia, and she came over and went down with me. And the guy at the door said, just like I told you, he says, do you want to stay sober on an all-time basis? And I says, you betcha. So he says, sit there in the front row, and I says, I've got a sponsor here by the name of Fowler. Oh, he said, didn't you hear about Fowler? And I said, no. He says, he got drunk last night. I said, hooray, I didn't like the bastard anyway. So we went and sat in the front row, and the guy was giving this big speech, quoting the Bible, going through all this simus again. And I turned to the guy sitting next to me, little Charlie Swearinger. And I said, I'm going home. I can't see how this is going to help me at all. This is a Main Street mission. All you need is sawdust on the floor. Well, he says, you see those guys over there? And I said, yeah. He says, they're all sober. And I says, how'd they do it? He says, well, they're doing it this way. He says, stick around. Give yourself a break. Stick around for at least 8 meetings and then make up your mind. We won't bother you. So I said, I'll just show you. You can't challenge an alcoholic, you know. So I sat with Cecilia. And then after the meeting, thank God, I met a guy by the name of Pete Cunningham that lived down in my area, down in my neighborhood. And old Pete kind of took over, and we made calls together and everything. And one time I said, Pete, how long have these guys been sober? Well, he says, Mort's been sober a year, Frank's been sober 6 months, and the rest have been sober by the week. And I says, how are we staying sober? He says, well, we're like a bunch of drowning men, and we're hanging on to each other to keep from going down the third time. And that was the philosophy, crazier than hell, you know. But we stayed sober. Well, everything's going to be fine now, you see. Everything's going to be fine. I'm going to get back at the top of the ladder. I'm going to get back on that first trombone deal out at the studios, and everything is going to be great. But it didn't happen that way. It was very, very tough. I had the worst year, the first year I was sober, that I ever had in my life financially. Isn't that something? I think I made $1,400. But you see, this is the way it was supposed to be. All of this was God's will. All of the things that happened to me was God's will. After I got into Alcoholics Anonymous, I started waking up to a lot of things that were happening. All the terrible drunks and all the terrible things that happened to me were all God's will. Somebody was trying to tell me something. And I was too damn egotistical and bullheaded to listen. If I had gotten into the good graces of all the orchestra managers at these studios as soon as I got sober, God, I'd have got drunk again, just sure as hell. The head would have swelled up. I remember one time I stood up in the meeting and I says, I used to make more money when I was drinking. And one of the mean old guys says, go back to drinking. And I says, I don't wanna. He says, okay, sit down, shut up, and listen. So I went to the leader of the group. His name was Frank Randall. And I said, do you know anybody in the music business? He said, no, why? And I said, I need a job real bad, and I thought you might have an angle. He says, my boy, this is not an employment agency. This is a place to stay sober. He says, what's your number one problem? And I said, alcohol's my number one problem. He said, okay, take care of your number one problem, and everything else will take care of itself when it's supposed to. He says, you might not get a job for 5 years the way you kick these people around, but you'll eat and you'll have a roof over your head. And from now on until they put you 6 foot under, worry about one thing, your number one problem. And you get everything in this world that you deserve, and most likely a lot more. And we all get a lot more than we deserve, and a lot more. I don't think there's been a day gone by that since that time 1,000 years ago that I don't think. I've got one problem. But I start worrying about little things, you know, like money. I got one problem, and that's alcohol. And if I take care of that one problem, everything else is going to take care of itself. And I have gotten more than I deserve, a lot more than I deserve. But every time things come up, every day I think of that. I got one problem, and this is it. And it works very good. Now there's a little guy by the name of Fidgy, piano player, who we all liked very much, all the musicians. He played like an angel. He was a little guy. And Fidgy, I was on CBS radio, 15-minute coast to coast. Had a nice home out in Santa Monica, a wife, a couple kids, a couple cars, and had the whole world by the tail. Making about $500 a week in those days. That was a lot of money. And old Fidgy got drunk. And you know, he was a full-blown alcoholic, it seemed, within no time at all. And of course, he lost his job, he lost his family, he lost everything he had in the world. So Fidgy ended up with nothing. He's got a couple stiff shirts and a couple of collars and a couple of tuxedos and no car, no nothing. He's starting to play in these piano bars, $50 a week in tips. So he gets a job way out on the south side of the piano bar. Everything's going along fine. He gets a good place. It was a good place. And he cased the whole neighborhood, and he found himself a room for $10 a week, because he gets through at 2 o'clock in the morning. There's no buses running. And when he checked the whole area again, he found out that from the piano bar to his room, he could take a shortcut through a little cemetery, a little winding path. So every morning when he's through at 2 o'clock in the morning, he's drunk as a goat. He follows this path. He's home in 10 minutes, never got into trouble. But this particular morning, he's awful drunk. He starts through this little cemetery, and he got off the path, and he fell in the hole. It was dug for a funeral the next day. And here's a poor little bastard in this hole, and he can't get out, he can't reach the top, and he's screaming like a Comanche all night long. Tuxedo on and a stiff shirt and a whole ball of wax. About dawn, an old wino come wandering through the cemetery, and he hears this bellering. And he walked around, and my God, here's little Fidgy down there. He found him down there. Fidgy, he'd given up. He just laid there and just given up. And the wino says, "What's the matter down there?" He says, "Get me out of here, I'm freezing to death. Get me out of here, I'm freezing to death." And the wino looked at him a minute, and he says, "Well, no wonder you're freezing to death. You kicked all your dirt off." No remarks. Yeah, you were just about to, though. I like to watch it. Well, anyway, all we musicians used to hang out at the Melrose Grotto on Melrose. At 4 o'clock, you could find all the freelancers like myself hung out there in that big long bar they had. That was the musicians' hangout. And one day, about 4 o'clock, we're all lined up there, and there's one empty stool. And the guy next to me nudged me, and he says, "Look at coming through the door, and here comes Fidgy." Fidgy was actually a person. He's dead now, but he was actually a person. And Fidgy looks like death warmed over. He'd torn his clothes, he'd puked all over himself. He was a hell of a mess. He moseyed over to this empty stool, and he pulled himself up. And he started beating on the bar. He says, "John, bartender John, give me a drink, John. Give me a drink. You know I'm the best damn piano player in the world. I can just play anything. Just give me a drink." So finally one of the musicians says, "Fidge, there's a piano over there. Let's hear you play anything." And he says, "I'll just show you." So he skidded off the stool, and he started for the piano. And by God, when he turned around, lo and behold, the seat of his pants were out and his ass was hanging out. My God, the bartender saw this, and he ran around the end of the bar just as Fidgy sat down. He says, "Do you know your ass is hanging out?" He says, "No, but you just sing a few bars and I'll follow you." That's better, aren't you? We get back to the program, we find out that the first 3 steps in our 12 steps are decisions we make, and then we get The rest of them are all what we call working steps. And that fourth step has always been so important to me, inventory. And it says in the book many times that we have defects of character, all alcoholics, and they run very much in a parallel, all of us. That thing that causes that emotional upset results in the drunk. Having had the physical allergy to alcohol, we all have that, 10% of all the people in the world. When we take a drink, it causes a compulsion to continue drinking, and look up compulsion. Compulsion is far beyond willpower, much more powerful. Well, what causes us to take that first drink is because we have certain defects of character. And I found out in myself the defects of character that I had that possibly always led to my drinking. I was full of self-pity or frustration, full of resentments, full of intolerance, full of selfishness. And I wrote these all down in my fourth step. And these have been wonderful, wonderful to me, because when things get bad, all I have to do is start reviewing what the hell's been going on today. And for some reason, I have been able to recognize why I feel as I do today, especially self-pity. Self-pity is something that we all have so much of. And all alcoholics run very much in a parallel with these defects of character. Very, very little variance. All of us exactly the same. Now we're starting to analyze ourselves. And if you don't like to analyze yourself, I'm sorry, but that's what I did. And by being honest in Alcoholics Anonymous, we really analyze ourselves. And we find out that certain things that we do always cause us to get into a big spin. A great big jump on the horse and ride in all directions. The old story. Been absolute wonderful to me. Then we get down that 12th step, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of those steps. What the hell is a spiritual awakening? And of course, as I told you before, Bill Wilson told me, he says, that's our change in our personality. It comes sooner or later to all members of AA who honestly try to live this program to the best of our ability. So we get back to that one thing. Action is the magic word. Action is the magic word. The old saw, God helps those who help themselves, is as true in Alcoholics Anonymous as anything else. The normal thing that happens to you and me, the normal thing that we have a change in our personality if we live these steps to the best of our ability. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not over there in Cloud 99. Nobody can make you get sober. You do it yourself in Alcoholics Anonymous. The philosophy of Alcoholics Anonymous is so set up that we stay sober and happily so. That's the way it is. That's the normal reaction that we get from following this set is sobriety and happiness. So this little boy was 4 years old, and he became completely blind. And his family took him everywhere, where they had great doctors, great eye doctors and eye surgeons, and no one was able to diagnose why he couldn't see. So he grew up to be a fine-looking young man. He's a college graduate, but he's totally blind. And then a young doctor, a modern young doctor, moved into this city where they live. He was an eye doctor and an eye surgeon. And he did wonderful things with some of their friends. So the boy went to see him. And the doctor says, from what you tell me, it'll take me some time to diagnose why you can't see. So he went back and made many visits to this doctor, and finally the doctor says, I think I have the proper diagnosis, but it'll mean an operation. And the boy said, let's go. So they went to the hospital, and he operated on this boy, and he laid up on this bed in the hospital for exactly 23 days, as quiet as he possibly could, with bandages over his eyes. Then the time came. The doctor called up the family and says, tomorrow we will find out whether this operation was a success or not. And here's the whole family standing around the bed. The doctor slowly took these bandages off the boy's eyes. And when he got him completely off his eyes, the boy opened his eyes, and my God, he could see light. He looked around, and pretty soon he could tell his family. He could grab the doctor by the hand. He said, Doctor, I don't know how to thank you. I just don't know how to thank you. And the doctor says, don't thank me. All I did was put in the stitches, and God took care of the rest. And in Alcoholics Anonymous, all we do is put in the stitches, and God takes care of the rest. God bless you, and I hope to see you again.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.